So with a very large brush, let's go ahead and cover my experience. I worked on video and animation as a freelancer for years. Having done so, I learned how to research and find the answers to problems on my own. Having run my own business, I've become very good at problem solving. I know how to look up and research whatever issue it is that I'm having. Sometimes I would have a problem and it was very technical and very specific to the program I was using. But other times I would have to solve an issue that was much more abstract and couldn't easily be found. So I would have to research and piece together answers from all over the internet to figure out what exactly is correct for my specific issue that I was trying to debug. Simply put, I know how to gather information and how to do good problem solving. And I learned the business skills of effective communication. In order to land a client, you're going to need them to instill trust and credibility in you. That goes into explain the process of your craft to another individual who has no idea about the field whatsoever. Clarity and effective communication are key. I also know about being cost effective, because regardless of what resources you're using or the situation, it's always a delicate balance between time and money. Should you use a tool that already exists, or should you build your own? Knowing how to manage the cost benefit is something that has been immediately applied into my coding education. Do I just need a quick, simple fix to resolve an issue for the overall bigger product? Or do I need to consider that large portions of this will be scalable? How will it function a year from now? What will the user experience be then? More specifically, in regards to code, I came into a job where they were using an internal tool to help build a gigantic summary report. This would factor in hundreds of phones of pass-fail with hundreds of different test cases. When I arrived, that internal tool was broken. The tool was built using Excel and VBScript. I didn't know VBScript, but I did know how to program. So I went into the legacy code, used resources online to learn VBScript. Eventually, I was able to fix our internal tool, saving our company and our team a lot of time. Then I took it a step further. As I started working there, I realized that we were doing plenty of manual processes that could have been automated. One of the things that took the most time was when we needed to update the source documentation's test cases. This process consisted of navigating through various subdirectories, opening a source documentation, scrolling through that source documentation to find the test case you needed to update, updating that test case result with any corresponding written information or comments about it, resaving it documentation, closing the documentation, opening and using the tool that I had fixed earlier to build a brand new giant summary report that is now up to date. Running that tool could take a few minutes. Now, a few minutes here and there don't seem significant, but when you're dealing with hundreds of test cases across hundreds of phones, those minutes will eventually become quite significant. So I created an internal tool for my team that, when used properly, will save them over 400 annual work hours. Even if you only paid your employee $20 an hour, that becomes $8,000 over the course of a year simply for updating files. I designed the tool so that once the summary report was already created, the user had the ability to update the summary report directly and verify that he wanted those changes to take place in the source documentation. Manual control and approval were very important to my boss, so I made sure to put in verification safeguards to help prevent any sort of accidental automation of the tool. This was a great learning opportunity for me because it allowed me to learn some of the real-world problems that software developers sometimes have to face. I had to face naming conventions that were inconsistent depending upon when the source documentation was originally created. Of course, I left plenty of documentation for anybody who wants to go into my code at a later date. I also left a GUI interface of instructions for anybody who ends up using the tool so they can be informed on how to use it properly, as well as what to expect out of it. It was also a great learning experience because I was receiving input from my peers and superior about what kind of features they would need implemented into the tool. I was really on my own as far as building the tool. And also, I have made personal projects. Each project I created was to help solve a problem specific to my need. For example, I created a car comparison tool. I needed to buy a car, but I didn't know how long a car would last me before I needed to obtain a new one. Things like miles per gallon, current mileage on the car, the actual cost of the car, factoring in the cost of gas, those are all things that ultimately will factor into the long-term cost of owning a specific car. So I had to compare cars, so I built a tool to really help show me if the difference between some options was negligible or quite contrasting in the long run. My wife and I needed an apartment, but some apartments would include some utilities that the other ones wouldn't. Some were all electric and some were gas. Some had a laundry machine, others charged extra for parking. At the end of the month, how can you really choose what is the most appropriate for your budget to live on with all these large variables? So I created a tool that would take all these variables and give me a realistic, true cost of living at that location. Then it would list those from least expensive to most expensive. Then me and my wife can make the determination based on that information and factor in our own preferences and our own wants for an apartment. One thing that makes me different is I do come from an artistic background. And with that, I'm always thinking of my user and what their mentality is when they're interacting with something that I've created. Technology is a tool that is still being utilized by a person for a purpose. The approach I have to software is to keep in mind the person using it and what they're needing from it and what they're thinking and experiencing with it. Thanks for watching. I hope to hear from you soon.